Well, let's start out this morning with a little game, okay? A little game, this or that. People in here who would say, I'm for cookies or I'm for cake. Who's the cookie people? Anybody for cookies? Who's for cookies, all right? Who's for cake? Anybody down with cake? Yeah, I love carrot cake, absolutely. How many people would be for cats or dogs? All right, who's our cat people? Anybody got some cat people? All right. How about dogs? Anybody dog people? They love dogs? See, people who say that for their cats are just like, dog people are like, yeah, you know? And exactly, that's dogs need masters who are going to be that excited about it. How many are here to say computer gaming or console gaming? Who are computer gamers? They would prefer computers. All right, see, I knew. Okay, how many people say console gaming? You know, let's do the console. Okay, great. How many would say Avengers or Justice League? Who's the Avengers people? Okay, how about our Justice League people? Yeah, that's right. 1045 is represented far better than the other services. Superman's on that team. That's what I'm talking about. Next, pancakes or waffles? How many pancake people do we have? That's right. How many waffle people? They're syrup traps. Those little holes. You like it traps that syrup. How many people would say they are a person who likes to text or a person who likes to call? Okay? Obama's a caller. All right, so how many people say they would like to text? They would be a texter, okay? How many people would prefer to make the phone call? They're just like, I don't want to do this texting stuff. Okay, great. And what's great is that in that whole thing is we have young people who prefer to call, and we also have young people who prefer to text, and you have older people who prefer to text. It's neat. It doesn't matter your age. This is kind of a preference. How many of you would say you're Coca-Cola or you're Pepsi? All right, who's the Coca-Cola people? Yeah, I like something to burn. When I drink and it goes down, it should burn your esophagus, all right? So how many people are Pepsi people? All right, excellent. Last one is Halloween time. How many people are Jack Skeleton people? There's like two of us weirdos, because I'm one. How about Jack Sparrow? Okay, so that's great. You see, you came to church today, and you've already had a disagreement. We've already accomplished something. Let's go home and pray, okay? We've already disagreed. And that's just, you know what? It's just a reflection of life. We will disagree. We will have disagreements. They just happen. It's just part of our life. And when you work at a place for a long time, when you are in a marriage, when you have family members, the longer you're on earth, the more opportunity that is going to be possible for you and I to disagree with someone and for them to disagree with us. I mean, it's something that happens. Disagreements are part of life. And we see that even in the Bible. There's some big disagreements that took place in the Bible. Remember back to our sermon series on Abraham? Well, Abraham and Lot disagreed. They knew that they had a lot of wealth, they had a lot of livestock, and basically they chose to agree to part ways. And Abraham said to Lot, you find the best land that you want, and I'll take what's left over. Joshua and Caleb are spies in the Old Testament, and they were sent into the promised land in order to do like recon missions, to go and just kind of scope it out. They came back and they said, we need to take this land. We need to go do this now. Well, there was disagreement there because the others thought, no way, we're not going to do that, not a chance. But probably the most famous disagreement takes place in the book of Acts. It takes place in the New Testament. And it's between two guys, Paul and Barnabas. And you would never imagine that these guys would disagree with each other. Maybe because one of them, Barnabas, his name means the son of encouragement. And you think, what? The son of encouragement, you can't imagine that guy ever disagreeing with anybody, that he would always get along with everyone. But no, he actually has a major disagreement with the Apostle Paul. And you think, wow, Paul is a guy who would disagree? I mean, he seems like just like the super apostle, you know. He's written so many letters in the New Testament that we have, that we read. God used him in a great way in the Roman Empire to help people learn and know more about Jesus. And yet you find both of these people who are great Christians come to a big disagreement. And it takes place in Acts chapter 15 and verse 36. You can follow along with your notes or open your Bibles up or open your Bible app up. You can follow along that way. But verse 36 says this. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they're doing." Verse 37, Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left. Commended by the believers in the grace of the Lord, he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So here, Paul and Barnabas have a major disagreement, and sharp disagreement is probably understated. It's such a major disagreement that literally that word means an intense, unreconcilable difference of opinion. So their disagreement is so strong that they're not going to be able to reconcile it. It's just, we cannot be on the same page here. And it causes them to part company. They choose to go their separate ways. We will experience disagreements like that. Some think that because of being a Christian, that you could never, ever disagree with another person. That you can never have a disagreement. That it would be ungodly to have a disagreement. Well, that's not true. We see here Paul and Barnabas, who are godly men. They have a disagreement, and things work out later, but they have a major disagreement. Now, there's some things that we can never budge on when it comes to disagreeing. Okay, we're going to disagree with culture when it comes to promoting just the basic human rights. We're going to disagree with culture when it comes to promoting the essential doctrines of our faith. And we're going to disagree, and we're not going to budge on the disagreement. But then there's going to be times when you and I disagree, and it's going to be over preference. There's going to be maybe a preference in style of music. There might be a preference in, for instance, in marriage. My wife and I disagree about the best hamburger place. She grew up in Missouri, and so her favorite place, which it didn't start there in Missouri, but her favorite place, I don't know the exact reason why, but she loves Five Guys so much. She absolutely loves Five Guys. But I grew up here, and so my favorite place is In-N-Out. I prefer that hamburger over Five Guys. Yeah. So, but what we do is we choose to compromise. So there's times when we'll go to Five Guys, and there will be times when we go to In-N-Out. But disagreements happen. The longer you stay married, the more you're going to experience this. You could have a disagreement as soon as you pull out and those cans are rattling behind that car. You can have a disagreement right there. Some of you know, I mean, it's happened before. You will have disagreements with your children. You'll have them with coworkers. It's part of life. So how do we respond? How do we respond when we experience disagreements and conflict in life? Well, I think there's a couple of things that we can look at, and I imagine even Paul and Barnabas would share this with us. The first thing is this. Disagreements are unavoidable. We need to expect them. They're unavoidable, and we need to expect them. We will have disagreements. It's just part of it. Paul and Barnabas have a sharp disagreement. They can't avoid it. It happens, and they choose to part ways. And the longer you're here on earth, the more you're going to experience that. And it shouldn't catch you off guard. Disagreements shouldn't catch you off guard. Conflict shouldn't catch you off guard. You should expect that this is going to happen as long as you're a human being on this planet. You're going to have conflict from time to time. And we see this even in the early church. And the thing about the Bible is that it shares with us reality. It doesn't paint a rosy picture. It shares with us reality in the book of Philippians that two sweet, dear old ladies actually had a major disagreement with each other in the church. And Paul writes to the city of Philippi, where the church is, in Philippians 4. And in verse 2, he says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers whose names are in the book of life. You know what he said there? He said, these dear, sweet old women, they've had a major disagreement. He doesn't say that they're not Christians. He says their names are written in the book of life. What he says is that they've had this disagreement, and I want you to help them find a solution. He doesn't say that, oh my goodness, I can't believe a disagreement happened. I would never expect a disagreement ever to happen in the church. I would never expect that to happen in life. My goodness, what's happening in this world? No, he says, hey, they had this disagreement. He doesn't go into details about their conflict. He just simply says, here's the solution. Have the same mind of Jesus. Try to get them to a point where they can have the same mind of Jesus. When people don't expect to experience conflict and disagreements in their life, they can usually approach it in one of two ways. One way to approach it, if you just feel like, you know what, disagreements should never happen, you're very uncomfortable with disagreements and conflict, you'll approach it in one way such as, I'm going to be passive about it. I'm going to bury my head in the sand. I'm going to ignore this. I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to pretend that this didn't happen. If I'm walking down the street and the person who I disagree with or I've had conflict with is coming the same way, I'm going to turn around and go back the other way, or I'm going to walk on the other side of the street. Or you'll have someone on the other side who will say, disagreement? My goodness, who would ever disagree with me? These people don't respond passively, they respond aggressively. When disagreement takes place, when they don't expect disagreement to happen, they become angry and upset and irate. They're like, how dare anybody ever disagree with me? What's wrong with these sick people that they would not agree with me? And our culture right now is struggling on how to handle disagreement. Our college campuses are having a very difficult time on how to handle disagreement. When someone shows up and their ideology or what they want to share is different than their own, instead of being willing to hear, we're becoming aggressive. How dare this be different than what I understand? And you just have to realize people will disagree with you. Your opinion is not final. Other people can have a different opinion. And if you go through life expecting to encounter disagreement, it's going to go a lot better for you than if you go through life and just ignore it, or you become irate because you think no one could ever disagree with you. So what can you do when you begin to expect disagreement? Well, number two is this. Disagreements can be dangerous, and you need to manage them. You need to manage them. If you begin to live a life that says, you know what, disagreement's going to happen and I can't avoid it. Well, when disagreement happens or conflict takes place, you need to be able to manage the disagreement and manage the conflict. You see, major conflict and major disagreements usually started out as something small. And because they were never managed, it grew to something worse. There was an author who went to his father's hometown in Italy and spent several weeks there. And while he was there, one of the things that he noticed, this town that everyone knows everyone, is that there was this older woman who walked with a cane, and she would walk to the cemetery. Once a week, she would go to the cemetery, and it was a process for her. She was older, she was slow, it was a long walk, and it would take her a good amount of time. Well, he began to just think, what's going on with this woman? I see this woman do this every week. She must have lost someone so dear to her, a child, a spouse, and she is just heartbroken to go to the cemetery weekly. And come to find out from the locals is that she's going to the cemetery weekly because she's bitter. See, the person that she now sees as her enemy is buried there, and she's going every week, one last time, to spit on their grave. You see what happens is at one point in the past, this was a conflict. This was a disagreement. And because it never got handled, because it never got managed, it now grew to this major problem of this poor old woman having to walk to the cemetery weekly in order to spit on this grave. Think what would have changed if it would have got handled, if it would have gotten managed, if things would have gone the right way when it came to this disagreement. Paul says this when he's talking about to the church when it comes to speaking about these disagreements in life. 2 Corinthians 12:20, he just says, I'm afraid that when I come, I won't like what I find, and you won't like my response. I'm afraid that I'll find quarreling, jealousy, anger, selfishness, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorderly behavior. And this is amazing. Paul's writing this. The previous letter that he wrote to this church was 1 Corinthians, and he writes to a church that has some small problems, but they also have some bigger problems. And he writes to them this first letter hoping that they would begin to manage these issues and change what they're doing. So by the time he writes the second letter, he's just, in his mind, he's just thinking, I bet you have not worked on these problems, and now when I show up, I bet there's going to be now full-scale fighting, quarreling, there's going to be jealousy, there's going to be fits of rage, that it's going to be a nightmare there. And that's what happens in our life if we never manage the disagreements and conflict that we experience. It just grows into be bigger problems. Being a pastor for a long time and dealing with a lot of different people show up, and they may show up and they're having, especially as a youth pastor, they're having these major problems with their students. And the thing is, what you realize is that this was never just a major problem like that. This was a small problem at one point. And because you haven't handled it, it's now become this major problem. That happens. It happens in work. When you have a problem, if you don't deal with the problem there at work, it just grows to being a major problem. And now we're all going with crisis control here. Instead, we need to deal with them when they're small. We need to deal with the disagreements that we have so that they grow out of control. Well, what are some ways that we could do that? Well, one of the ways is that we don't judge. Don't judge. When we have a disagreement with someone, we honestly don't know the motivations in their heart for why they're disagreeing with us. They don't know our motivations. Paul could have said about Barnabas, he could have said, you know what? You are so soft as a leader. You need to toughen up. And Barnabas could have said to Paul, you know what, Paul? You're a mean, grumpy, old, crusty apostle, and you just need to loose it up. They don't do any of that. They don't judge each other on it. They just choose to part ways. Another thing that we could do is don't gossip. If you have a disagreement with someone or you have a conflict with someone, go and actually talk to the person. Don't go on social media. Don't go on social media saying, my wife this, my husband that. If your parents have upset you, don't go on social media blasting them there on Facebook. If you're upset with work, don't blast your boss on social media. You may delete your post, you may delete your Facebook account. Guess what? It's not deleted. That wishing well is really deep, and it can be found. Don't go on there. Don't gossip. That gossiping and ripping somebody with somebody else ripping that person when they're not around, that's never, ever helped out a situation. If you have a disagreement or conflict, you should just go to the person. Go to that person. Be strategic. What that simply means is that I have a disagreement and conflict. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to ask God for wisdom, and I'm going to ask that the best would come out of this. That's exactly what Paul and Barnabas did. They parted ways, and the best came out of it. Barnabas took John Mark with him. That was his cousin. And Paul took Silas with him. If you read the rest of Acts, you can see the great things that God did through Paul and Silas. And we know from reading Paul's letters that God did a great work through John Mark. In fact, John Mark is the author of the Gospel of Mark. Later on in life, as Paul's getting ready, he knows he's going to be killed by the Emperor Nero through capital punishment. Paul writes his very last letter, 2 Timothy, and in there, he specifically mentions, he says, will you please send John Mark to me because he's very dear to me. So we know that God worked it out later. In the moment, it just seems like this is a disaster. I can't believe I'm having a disagreement. If we just manage it and be strategic about it and ask God for his help, God can work these things out. The third thing is this. Some disagreements can be resolved. We need to face them. That's the whole part of being strategic, is that these disagreements actually, some of them can be resolved. We just have to be willing to face them. Romans 12:18 says, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. You see what Paul says there? Again, that's why I just love the Bible being so real with us. He says, if it's possible, because Paul knows that some disagreements aren't going to be able to be reconciled. But he says, if it's possible, if this disagreement, this conflict's possible, try to live at peace. Try to seek the peaceful solution. Try to face it. Try to handle it. It can be resolved. If you don't resolve some disagreements, we know they can be a disaster, right? That's what happened to a lady. She got her house TP'd with toilet paper. She was getting it out of her tree. There was some spots that were hard to reach. Instead of getting a ladder and getting a rake and taping maybe 2 rakes together in order to try to get this toilet paper out, she decided she was going to burn it out of the tree. So she lit the toilet paper on fire. It lit the grass on fire and then lit her house on fire. When you are seeking to resolve some disagreements that can be resolved, fire's not the issue. Okay? Don't use fire, please. Face the disagreements. Some of them can be resolved. Choose to face them, because if you do, it will go well. It will go well. I love how it's said in Philippians 2, 3, and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Some of our disagreements can be resolved if you just have at least one person who's willing to say, I'm going to put you first. Think about what would happen in our homes or in our workplace or you name it. If you had 2 people who just said, you know what, I'm going to do the best that I can for as long as I live to look for the best interests of you. Think about how that would work. So there's some disagreements that actually can be resolved if you would have people who just said, you know what, I'm going to try to do the best for you. I'm going to try to look out for the best for you. However, there's some disagreements that can't be resolved, and we need to let them go. We need to let them go. Paul and Barnabas were not going to resolve this disagreement. It just wasn't going to happen. Paul didn't want to take John Mark. Barnabas did. And so they weren't going to resolve it. So what did they do? They did what was best. Let's just let it go. Let's agree to disagree. Let's go our separate way. It's okay. God's going to work in my life, and God's still going to work in your life. And it's all right. Let's just let it go, and let's move on. But when you don't let it go, it creates obsession. It creates revenge. It's like the story. Anybody ever read the story, Moby Dick? Some of you might have read this story. Maybe you've heard of this story. But Captain Ahab loses his leg. And rather than just letting it go, he spends the rest of his life pursuing the whale that took his leg. And it was to his detriment, to the rest of the people around him, to their detriment of him being obsessed with revenge, that Captain Ahab lost his life, and the whale still lived. And that's what happens when we continue to hold on to the conflict and the disagreement. When we try to resolve something that just can't be reconciled, it ends up sinking us into obsession and revenge, right? We have that. When we disagree with somebody and we don't just let it go, when that person comes into the room, we're full of just like a massive amount of annoyment. We're so annoyed and we can't figure it out. It's easy. It's easy because you're still holding on. That's why you're annoyed, because you're still holding on to it. You don't realize that this disagreement isn't going to work out. It might be at work. You might say, I can never reconcile this disagreement at work. Well, work there as long as you can and then find a different job. Don't hold on. Ask God to help you find a different job. Work on it as long as you can. And if you can't agree and you can't reconcile it, you're going to have to eventually let it go. People may not see it the way that you see it, and you're going to have to be willing to move forward. Proverbs 17:14 says, starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam, so drop the matter before the dispute breaks out. Solomon's saying, you know what, the longer you hold on to this, every time you get around this person or these people, it's going to be very easy for you to just resort to picking a fight. And when you pick a fight, you're just basically putting a hole in a dam, and now the water's leaking out. And then every time you get around them, you're just putting more holes in it. And before you know it, you only have 10 digits. But you have 20 holes now. You have to be willing just to let it go. And for some of you might be saying, Jim, there's no way. This disagreement, this conflict has cut me deep. And that's true, because some disagreements will leave scars, and we need to forgive them. Some of them leave scars. You might be sitting there this morning thinking, you know what, my disagreement is not some small little thing like whether I should go to Five Guys or In-N-Out. My disagreement is like a massive, huge thing. And this conflict in my life from this other person has actually scarred my heart. It's cut me to the heart. And you know what? You're right. I don't understand what your scars are like. And you don't understand what my scars are like. The only thing I can tell you is that my scars in my life would continue to open up if I didn't choose to forgive. And it's not an easy thing. It's not something where I'm just saying, hey, okay, it's like reading a fortune cookie, and now you're like, oh yeah, okay, I can forgive now. I just turn it on like that. No. The miracles in the Bible of raising the dead, those are miracles. But other miracles are God's forgiveness coming through our life. Because see, for me, I don't need a dead to be raised. What I need is for God to give me supernatural forgiveness. Because I can't generate it myself. So for the scars that you carry and the scars that I carry, the only way to not continue to pull the scabs up is for God to be able to come alongside us and give us a supernatural ability to practice radical forgiveness. And I can't tell you how to do it, and I can't tell you how to just turn the switch and become forgiving. All I can say is that I would go to God. That's just me. I would go to God and say, God, I don't know how to forgive, but I know you do, and will you please help me? Will you please help me with this? But I know for a fact you'll never heal unless you forgive. Because if you don't forgive, if you don't let go, you're just going to continue to pull up the scabs. And you're never going to find healing. Paul says in Ephesians 4:31-32, he just says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you. Paul here is saying, what he's showing us is he's painting this picture of a staircase, okay? So just kind of think of the stairs. And he's saying that if you don't forgive, you know what happens is you just begin to progress further into your rage, into your anger, into not healing. And it starts out as bitterness. It actually starts out as anger. You know how anger stays? Pride. Pride is the lid that you twist on your heart in order to keep the anger inside. And then what happens is that the anger stews, Paul says. It becomes bitterness, becomes fits of rage, becomes brawling, becomes every form of malice, where that person that you have a disagreement with or conflict with, you don't want anything good ever to happen in their life. And if you get to that point, you would get so far as saying, if I could put my word in, I would hope they never ended up in heaven. That's how far we go up the staircase. And Paul says, you know what keeps us off the staircase is if we practice forgiveness. And it's super hard and it's not easy, but he says with forgiveness comes kindness. He says, be kind. Then he says, be compassionate. And then he says, forgive as God Christ forgave you. Which kind of looks like if you die right now and you go to God, he opens up his folder, and in that folder is your entire background. And it's everything you've said, everything you've done, everything you've thought. And I got to imagine that in my folder, I'm almost certain, I can guarantee you, in my folder, there's things in there I don't want a keynote presentation on. I don't want that played on the screen as my illustration. Let me illustrate to you with Pastor Jim how not to live life. I don't want that. And I'm pretty sure you don't want that about your own life being displayed like that. So you look at that folder and you're like, these are all the things that I hate, all the things that I'm not proud of, all the things I'm ashamed of. But they're at the top. You have Jesus with a stamp on it saying you've been approved, you've been forgiven. So when you think about all that God's forgiven you of, shouldn't you and I, since we've been recipients of that, shouldn't we at least offer that to somebody else? Because we've been forgiven for so much. It's like you've been given 2 free tickets to the party, and you're going to take your free ticket, but you're going to charge the other person. You're going to say, oh, dude, you owe me $20 for this. Dude, you got 2 free tickets. And it's the same thing with God. God's saying, I've forgiven you of so much. Shouldn't you at least extend a branch to try to forgive them? Shouldn't you forgive them? Because if you don't, it's just going to take you down. You can't go on and undo all the pain that you've caused somebody else, and someone can't go on and do all the pain that they've caused you in the past. I think about that with my own mom. I had the worst spring break ever. Months before my mom died. I was living with my sister. She had guardianship of me, and I remember going out to Yucca Valley to my mom's place and spending spring break out there. And during that time, my mom wasn't the perfect mom. She went out to the bar with her boyfriend, and there was times when, I wanted to get my way, and I didn't get my way. And so, when I called home to my sister, I exaggerated some things like, mom's terrible and awful, and it was bad. And I was being selfish, and my mother was being selfish. And so my sister came and picked me up, and months later, my mother died. I can't remember a lot of experiences with my mom before she died. All I can remember is that spring break, really. That's the worst spring break ever. I can't go undo that. I can't go back to my mom and say, I'm sorry for what I did and ask for forgiveness. But you know what I could trust in? What happened 2,000 years ago on the darkest spring break ever. And during that springtime, the Father of the universe sent his only Son to die on a cross for us. And because of that, I'm able to take the guilt and shame that I have from the scars that I caused to my mom, and also the guilt and shame that she probably experienced on earth from the scars that she caused to us, and to be able to let go of it and let it just sink in the ocean of God's forgiveness. And God, that's what we want for our life. We want to be forgiven for the wrongs that we've done to others. And Lord, I know that others would like to be forgiven for the things maybe they've done to hurt us. And Lord, I know that this forgiveness won't come easy and that it's difficult. And so I pray for your help. Because I can't do it, Lord, without a miracle of your strength. And so I pray that for all of us, Lord. I pray that we would show forgiveness, Lord. I pray that we would show kindness. And we would allow you to work in the other person's life. And not try to move forward carrying all the baggage, carrying the pain, but just to let go and to try to move forward the best that we can. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.